We've got a new panelist. Big up to Nick Abbott. We're just discussing a couple of concepts, things, bits and bobs offline. But yeah, I was going to let Nick have the floor. We were just talking about free speech, and yeah, well, I'll let Nick explain.
Is my voice back again?
Yeah, your voice is back. Yeah.
So yeah, I was just saying. Yeah, so I think we have to figure out speech in terms of the moral aspect of speech and the political aspect of speech. Now, I think when it comes to because free speech is not a moral standpoint, it's a political standpoint, right? It's saying that I don't want my voice to be shut down. So it's a protest slogan, basically, is how I see it. Yeah. But then what we're missing out in society is the moral aspect of speech. What is right to say and what is wrong to say? So I think people are very obsessed with I'm being shut down from saying what I want to say, but no one's actually speaking about the moral aspect of speech. What's your moral stance of speech? You see, and which one is more important to you? Is it the political side that you're being shut down, or is it the moral aspect of speech? So which one are you actually more, involved in, right? And a lot of people should be involved in what their moral principles are. Not what's a protest slogan. I'm not going to spend my life defending a protest slogan if my moral principles are more important to me. See what I'm saying? So it's either you're more politically involved or you're more morally involved in terms of your principle, in terms of what you're promoting. So I find it that a lot of people that are not bothered about their moral, if they even have moral principles, they're just all about slogans.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I suppose you would hope that people kind of sort of define a sort of suitable moral structure before pursuing kind of some political goal. But I mean, yeah, there has been just kind of, yeah, I guess you could say just a lot of so you're linking a kind of slogan driven free speech politic with amorality, essentially. So people kind of, I guess it's people like Rob. Is that could I sort of imagine someone like that who just wants to kind of, it seems, remove the limits of what's offensive or what isn't offensive in pursuit of some free speech ideal? Is that what you mean? Like a kind of
yeah, in terms of yeah, so it's like, so free, like where did the term, how did the term free speech come about is a question even in itself, right? Like, how did it come about? So is it politically motivated, right? Or is it morally motivated? Is it motivated by upholding morals, as in what is good to say or what is bad to say? Or is free speech just the notion that we should be allowed to say? So it's basically fighting the higher power, fighting the government.
I'm going to look into the origins of free speech. We'll see. So now in America they've got like, is it the Second Amendment that more or less gives them a degree of free speech? I think maybe even enshrines it in law. They might have a little bit more than we do.
Yeah, but now that's got nothing to do with the morals of speech. Do you understand? Like, what do you like? What's your morals based on speech, right? Are you a person that just says whatever you want, whether it's insulting or not, right? So I'm interested. I'm not interested in your political slogans. I'm interested in what you morally uphold when it comes to speech.
First Amendment, 20 Faces is saying in the chat. Freedom of speech seems to have originated in ancient Greece, from what I can find.
Yeah.
It's considered to be kind of a core democratic ideal. The First Amendment guarantees free speech, although in the US there are limits on this freedom. So obviously you've got the defamation laws and the libel laws here, which I guess curtail free speech just quite naturally. Also limits on hate speech and incitement to violence. So yeah, but then you also you have stuff like I don't know, sort of saying your P's and Q's, or kind of,
because I think what will shape society, because what shapes society is not slogans. It's actually what you morally uphold as principles is what shapes society. So if you think that cussing someone, for example, just randomly, nothing wrong with it, right? So that's your moral level, like that's your moral stance, that you don't care, basically, right? You don't have, like, having a sense of shame doesn't mean anything to you, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm more interested in the individual rather than slogans, political slogans. I'm interested in the individual that I'm talking to. What is your moral principle when it comes to speech, right?
Rob, where you at? I summon you. Rob, you or someone like Rob, maybe a James SC, if James SC has woken up yet or isn't at the park. Because I think I can believe, or I can understand the concept of free speech, but I don't think I believe it exists in any meaningful sense for me. I kind of self-censor myself
Yeah,
a lot of the
like
time in
like,
public.
look, it's a political thing. Like,
Yeah, it is.
if the government is saying you can't say certain things, then yes, that's where free speech comes in. That's all it is. It's a political force. It's a political fight back. That's all it is. But that's not what I'm interested in. That's not my main issue when it comes to speech. My main issue when it comes to speech is the individual himself or herself, how they handle speech. What is their boundaries, right?
Well, I guess you could. I guess you. So their boundaries, the boundaries of speech, I guess, would be informed by, like you said, people's morals, people's kind of level of empathy, maybe. I guess you call it like political awareness, or wrap it up in a bundle. I guess political correctness, but I mean, I would say generally people don't leave their house and seek to kind of purposely offend people. I think often what happens is people, it would seem, and I guess these people would be justified in sort of discussing it. They do something with good intention, and then they find out that in doing so, their actions are perceived as I don't know, offensive in some form. Could be racist or sexist or whatever. And then there's a case of kind of, I guess, going back to the drawing board sincerely and sort of saying, well, why did that person feel like that? And maybe even going onto the internet and then discovering that there's thousands and thousands of people who've all experienced the same thing, and that society seems to have changed in some way. You know, moved from I suppose this well-intentioned sort of good faith kind of society to assuming that everyone is out there trying to offend everybody else. Hold on, we've got some. We've got James SC in the chat, and we've also got Witness. Okay, Witness. I'm not going to confirm or deny Witness. I don't know who's on Discord or what, but yeah. But if you or James want to jump on, we're discussing the limits of free speech, or the sort of boundaries of it, and whether or not those boundaries are defined by people's morals. And I guess then amoral speech would just be this boundaryless I can say whatever I want with no consequence. That's like that's kind of an ultimate freedom. I mean, I'm not sure I'm.
I mean, I'm just interested in the person's principles. Like, that's all I'm interested in. I mean, if a person says, "I have no boundaries," then that's how you live your life.
Well,
you know, so there's nothing.
Of course.
So for me, if the person says there's no boundaries, then for me, insulting that person's mother, for example, he shouldn't find a problem with it. It's as simple as that.
If that's what their beliefs are.
If. But this is the thing, because it's not about free speech. It's about the individual's moral stance when it comes to speech. How do you practice speech? Do you swear a lot? Do you cuss a lot? You know, it's not necessarily based on offending people, right? It's not necessarily based on offending people, but you get people that don't even like to say the F word, right? And they find pride in that, right? So again, I'm more interested in the individual rather than slogans.
Good afternoon, Dan. Good afternoon.
Witness.
Afternoon, Evie. I recognize that voice. I can never forget that voice.
Yeah, what are you saying?
I'm cool. I was interested in what you guys were saying about freedom of speech. The closest you can get to freedom of speech legally in the UK, of course, is the Human Rights Act of 1998. And in there, it has different articles. I'll just read out Article 10, Part 2 of Article 10. There are two parts to it, which deal with freedom of expression. The second part says, the exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interests of national security, territorial integrity, or public safety, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals. So even there, it's telling you that legally, there's no such thing as absolute freedom of speech. And if it feels that your freedom of expression is somehow a detriment to public safety, national security, territorial integrity, and if they wish to protect people's health or morals, that your freedoms will be subject to restrictions or penalties.
Mm.
That's what it says in the Human Rights Act 1998, Article 10.2 of freedom of expression. So it doesn't exist. Absolute freedom of expression legally doesn't exist in the UK. Never has. So that's it. So all these weirdos who keep on saying freedom of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. It's like, where are you getting it from? It's stuff they're making up in their own head, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of always under the impression that there are freer places on the earth in certain senses. You may be freer to discuss the corruption of politicians in certain countries, maybe freer to discuss the controversial dealings of certain businessmen in other countries. I mean, I know here that I mean, the media has always been quite heavily controlled.
But you do know in this country, they also have the Official Secrets Act. So there are certain things you don't have the freedom of expression to say in regards to the government. So
yeah, I mean, I suppose that stuff it's kind of reasonable to a point. If you've also then got some sort of suitable whistleblowing structure. I'm cool with the Official Secrets Act if somebody can blow the whistle when it gets really bad. I think if we've got, I don't know. That's maybe a slightly different.
And the irony of the whole freedom of speech thing is what a lot of the people who complain and say, oh, freedom of speech, they want to be able to say what they want. They already have the freedom to say what they want. What I believe they don't like is they don't want people to have the freedom to respond back to them. They don't like that.
Yeah.
So they want to be abusive about religion, race, gender, disability, and they don't want the people they are offending to be able to respond back to them. That's what I think they don't like. They don't want you to say anything. They just want you to shut up and just let them get away with saying what they want without being challenged. That's what I think it's all down to, because they have the freedom to say what they want. You've been on Hangouts for how long? You've lived in England. People say whatever they want when they want. You know, they say despicable things about women, non-white people, disabled people, religion, so they can say what they want.
A witness, Phil. Someone wants to meet you. Forgot thinking now.
Who?
Someone
Sorry?
wants to talk to you. Sir Faz.
Why?
It was over about that Christian guy. I forgot his name now. Kryptonite.
Kryptonite?
Yeah.
What about Kryptonite?
He used to be called Saved by the Grace. I don't know. He just had to pass the message on to you.
I don't know Kryptonite. I see him. He's the guy who's always shouting in the park, isn't he?
Yeah.
Arguing with Muslims.
Apparently, you're a witness to a hangout call when he was called Saved by the Grace.
Is he saved by the grace?
Yes.
Oh wait.
That's why Sir Faz wants to talk to you.
Wow.
Because
okay.
Because he used to have the name Saved by the Grace.
Well, I don't know if he's saved by the grace, but I remember Saved by the Grace. Saved by the Grace used to be on the Hangouts a lot, arguing with Muslims. I remember.
He admitted to being saved by the grace.
Oh, he admitted to it. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, but I do remember Saved by the Grace. I do remember he used to turn up trying to argue and debate with Muslims online, and then he suddenly disappeared. So all this time he was Kryptonite, who then came to the park. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Interesting. I never knew that. The plot thickens.
The plot thickens, yeah, indeed. Big up to James SC. James, you there? Oh, he might be making a coffee or something. And I think Nick's jumped off as well.
Nick?
Nick, EB, I think you called him. EB.
EB, yeah.
So all this Saved by the Grace stuff happened before I was on Hangout, so I know nothing about it. He just said if anyone saw witness, just to pass the message on. So tell us more about when he was saved by the grace, because he admitted it in a live stream that he was saved by the grace. So
saved by the grace was sometimes mocked online by Muslims. They used to say he was a second-rate version of Christian Prince. That's what they used to say. They said that he was not as good as Christian Prince. He was like a poor man's version of Christian Prince. So basically, he would just come online and he would just start interrogating Muslims. But then when people would ask him to talk about the Bible, he would do what Christian Prince does. He wouldn't talk about the Bible. And that was basically it. So people just used to make fun of him, saying, you're just a poor man's version of Christian Prince. You're not really that good. And then after a while, he just disappeared. I think he used to communicate with Takia Watch as well. They used to be, they used to be, I remember them being on a Hangout at the same time, because when people were trying to debate, Christianity versus Islam. So that's interesting. So he got tired of doing it from the computer and decided to start coming to the park. Okay.
Apparently Sir Faz had a debate with him, and a Christian left Christianity because of that debate, and that he's not been on Hangout since he's debated Faz, and he's just gone to the park.
Wow.
Well, I've just added Faz to the back chat if he wants to jump in.
I definitely remember Saved by the Grace. I definitely remember listening to him arguing with Muslims, definitely. But you've just told me now that he's admitted to being Kryptonite. So, okay, that explains a lot. He stopped coming online and he now comes to the park. All right, fair enough. It would be interesting if Sir Faz ever went to the park to see Kryptonite. What Kryptonite would do. Be interesting. He'd probably deny not knowing Sir Faz, or maybe they'd start another debate. Who knows?
Yeah, I think I was trying to speak to Kryptonite when he came on. I think he just wanted to kind of identify the Muslims and just attack. I don't think he wanted to get into any kind of pleasantries like, "Hi, how are you? This is what I'm about." I think once he knew my name, it was just a kind of Dan, are you going to moderate? Dan, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to moderate. I sort of see this guy at the park, kind of, surrounded by 10 hecklers, and think you can kind of handle yourself, and then he gets in the hangout. He was sort of tugging at my ankles for moderation, but yeah, he didn't say much about his background. People were sort of coming to the conclusion that he might be like a Kurdish Christian or something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it kind of helps people work out what someone's politic is, because he doesn't actually say that much about why Christianity is superior. I mean, I suppose that's his particular angle, his style of apologetics or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's not that. I don't know. Maybe I suppose that's the point. It's just supposed to put you off Islam. Like, I'm not massively convinced by Islam anyway. But I don't think he makes. I don't know. I'm not sure. People saying he's he's from Iran, ex-Shia, said Grey Dunya. Apparently. I mean, yeah, this stuff, it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea into people's political.
So what, Mad Dunya is Grey Dunya?
Mad Dunya's Grey Dunya, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
He's changed his name again.
He switched it up, yeah. It's no longer Grey, it's just mad. Tanvir Chima said we need Robo Rob on. Yeah, I mean, Rob.
It was funny, I think certain people were there when Ralph was spouting off his nonsense, and Ralph was being filmed. And then when a particular group of guys were coming close to Ralph to talk to him, Ralph started screaming for the police and started running. He goes, "Where's the police? Where's the police?" And he was trying to lie that they had knives.
Someone had a knife, yeah. I saw that. Yeah, I think that's it's a sign of a desperate man, I'd say. Although it's kind of sad. I found myself. I was watching a COE video. In this, if this Hangouts world and this Speakers Corner world is going to be divided into like atheists or non-atheists, then I don't know. Maybe I'm on the non-atheist side, and I find myself on the side with people like Ralph. And that Jamie guy, lots of questionable people, and this is sort of when I don't know. I guess my default position is always to kind of have a personal faith and to be very. I'm kind of quite distrusting of groups and group dynamics. I think a lot of people's individual. I mean, yeah, what makes people unique is lost in groups.
Because I won't do that. Like, if Rob is criticizing and challenging Muslims or Christians, I won't take Rob's side. That's it. I won't. But it was funny. I was talking to TYO. I think he's a young Ottoman Turk.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was one time on Valley Vision where Ralph was debating. Who was Ralph debating about God? It was either James Jones or Ultra Funky or Valley Vision. And TYO was in the chat supporting Ralph. And I said, "Listen, TYO," I typed in, I said, "Listen, you do know that if Ralph gets his way, he's going to deport Muslims, right?" And then TYO responded and laughing, he goes, "Yeah, he knows, but because they both believe in a God, he'll just support him for this one issue."
The single issue support. Well, yeah, I mean, I think Ralph's brought forth some interesting philosophical claims, and I think it frustrates people because, I mean, even for me, a lot of the it seemed to me that he was using Christianity in like a nominal way, just throwing it in with some really quite questionable politics, but using it as a basis for that politic, but without actually quoting much scripture. I mean, I've probably I haven't heard maybe 3 or 4 passages from the Bible.
Well, this is where I clashed with him, because I debated and I said, "You're not a Christian because you don't follow the teachings of Jesus. You can't use any of the New Testament to corroborate any of the politics you're saying. And he admitted to me, and he's done this more than once on Veli's channel, he said that the Christian scriptures are just words and they are full of contradictions. So I'm like, well, he's just proven my point. If you're a Christian and you're passionate, you wouldn't say that about the Bible. You wouldn't, because that's disrespectful to the Bible. So he just blatantly admitted it more than once. He did it to me on Veli's channel, and he did it again to someone else on Veli's channel. He said, Christian scriptures are just words full of contradictions. I'm like, well, he's not following the scriptures, is he? So it's obvious.
I think what he tries to do, though, is he tries to ground his belief in philosophy and highlights the limits of logic and reason quite well in kind of, I guess, arriving at proofs. I mean, and he's got kind of like a computer scientist approach to things like that. So he's I would say he's philosophically quite capable.
But he's philosophically disingenuous. He's dishonest.
He's dishonest.
Because you will talk about his computer philosophical, scientific, mental way of looking at things. But then when you go into the realm of saying, well, prove to me that God exists, then he will suddenly jump into the realm of metaphysics and say, well, it's metaphysical. There's nothing I can say that will make you believe it. But so, well, hold on a minute. You're trying to be all, robotic and meticulous in the way you talk about things. So do the same thing for this God, and you won't do it. So it's like, I don't know. I never clash with religious people if they say from the start what they have is a faith, a belief, and they can't 100% prove it, but they feel and believe it. Then I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not going to argue with you when you say that. But if you're a religious person and you suddenly make the claim that your book is scientific, then I'm just going to do what comes natural. I'm going to say, okay, well, the scientific method has a number of things. One of those things is observation. Can you please show me the observational case studies of the things in this book? And then they start getting upset. It's like, well, you shouldn't have used the word scientific, because naturally you go into the realm of the scientific methods. So just say for what it is. You believe it, it's a faith, it makes you happy, and yeah, fine, then we leave it at that. Don't bring science into it, because then you open yourself up to questions of, bring me the observational evidence. What are you going to do there? So that's the problem with it.
20 Faces said, Ralph said that faith is not subject to logic. That's beyond insane. Let me check that out. Because I often find that things that don't appear to kind of hold on. Is there anything logical about faith? Okay, this has come up. This is a question from Quora. This isn't by any means an authority. I know there's no logical reason for faith. Faith is a choice, a personal preference, not a logical conclusion. Yeah, so I would say, yeah. I guess maybe by definition, faith isn't necessarily subject to logic. Let me check this out. There seems to be a distinction between logic and faith, at least from what I'm reading here. Is it logical to have faith? In a nutshell, Gödel demonstrated that no system of logic or mathematics can prove its own axioms. Every logical system relies on the a priori acceptance of... interesting, this is from chabad.org. This is the Jewish consideration on it. Every logical system relies on the a priori acceptance of unprovable first principles. Life too relies on faith. We cannot step out of our beds in the morning without pure, simple faith in hundreds, perhaps thousands of basic assumptions for which we have no real proof. We run our lives with an unquestioning assurance that today will follow the same laws as yesterday and tomorrow the same as today, that our senses are not deluding us, that we are awake and not asleep, that our memories are reliable, that our food is not poisoned and our doctor is not out to kill us, that life is better than death, and that all its pain does not measure up to its happiness. It's logical to have such faith, because otherwise life would have to be led in an insane asylum or under the influence of psychotropics. So too, it is logical to have faith that God is good. Okay, that's slightly different. Hold on, these 20 faces come back. What if you have faith in a concept that is riddled with logical contradictions? That's a problem. Well, if you have faith in a concept that's riddled, I think something can still be true even if it's
No, you have to be careful, because if something you have faith in is full of contradictions, then you could be accused of having cognitive dissonance, where you're having faith in something which is contradictory. So if someone was to say that a religion was contradictory, they would have to start evidences for that. So, and then people would discuss it and see whether it becomes subjective or whether they have a legitimate claim to say that it is full of contradictions. You'd have to bring evidence to back up that statement.
All right, so all right, so I was thinking about this yesterday. I found a Reddit thread where it was like an atheist versus, it was like just a religious discussion. There was loads of people, pantheists, Christian atheists. There was actually a Christian atheist. It was kind of funny. Loads of people, and someone pointed out a fallacy that I've never heard of, which is the fallacy, which is a logical fallacy. The fallacy, yeah, which is a logical fallacy that occurs when someone assumes that if an argument contains a logical fallacy, then its conclusion must necessarily be wrong. Which is interesting. Yeah, and it's perhaps one of the most I'd say one of the most important fallacies just by its implications. Okay, so this could be one way of considering the fallacy. For example,
do you have an example of it?
Yeah. Okay. The proposition "dogs usually have a tail" is true. However, it's possible to formulate an infinite number of fallacious arguments in support of this proposition, as in, dogs usually have a tail because dogs usually have a tail, or dogs usually have a tail because they're purple. This demonstrates why the fact that a certain proposition is supported by a fallacious argument does not mean that that proposition is necessarily false, and why assuming that this is the case is fallacious in itself. So it gives an example of, here's one. Examples of the fallacy. A simple example of the fallacy is the following. Alex, this new cake mix contains only natural ingredients, so it's better for you than traditional cake mixes. To which Bob replies, it's fallacious to assume that this cake mix is better just because it contains only natural ingredients, so you're wrong. Here it's true that Alex is using a logical fallacy in his statement, namely an appeal to nature, since he assumes that just because the cake mix uses natural ingredients, then it must be better for you, and it's reasonable of Bob to point this out. However, since Bob goes further and assumes that Alex is wrong simply because his argument contains a fallacy, Bob ends up using a fallacious argument himself, namely one with the fallacy in it. This is a problem since it's entirely possible that Alex is right and that his new cake mix is indeed better than the traditional ones, even if he hasn't properly articulated the reasons for this. There's another one involving...
So even if he hasn't articulated... Even if he hasn't articulated the reasons for it, he could still be right. He could still be logical.
Yeah. It could still be true. The logic is questionable, but the truth in the proposition is there. So here's another one. Alex says, all foxes have tails. The animal that just ran into that bush had a tail. Therefore, that animal was a fox. Bob replies, what you said is fallacious. So it's just because that animal had a tail, that doesn't mean that it was a fox. This means that you're wrong, and that the animal that just ran into the bush wasn't a fox, right? So here Alex uses fallacious reasoning when deducing that the animal he saw was a fox, as Bob rightly points out. However, just because Alex's reasoning was invalid doesn't mean that his conclusion is necessarily wrong, and it's entirely possible that the animal in question was indeed a fox. Bob's reasoning is therefore fallacious because he displays the fallacy when he assumes that Alex's conclusion must be wrong because the process that he used to reach it is flawed. Which is interesting. I mean, it's not.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't render your argument watertight logically, but I mean, you can still be arguing for something that is true in reality. But yeah, I forgot why I
But
mentioned
what
that.
the other party could have said, though, is that because you used fallacious reasoning, we have no reason to give any credence to what you've just said. So we could say that because you've used fallacious reasoning, there's no reason to believe that what you said is true, kind of, and then that would be fine, and you can just like ignore the flawed argument that they've just made and disregard it, discard it.
Let me see if there's another example here. All right, so how to counter the fallacy? What do you understand what it is? Okay, so I think maybe what you just did is correct. Explain why this reasoning is fallacious. You can do this by calling out your opponent on their use of the fallacy. But no, sorry, this is something else. Okay, so all right, you can. But I mean, everyone has a capacity for making fallacious arguments, so logical fallacies.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, if that was the case, then we could technically
My
discount.
problem is,
Sorry, carry on, witness. Yeah.
I was just saying, my problem is I struggle to fully understand what fallacious is, so I have to be careful. I wouldn't even use that word if I was challenging someone, because I don't fully understand the meaning of fallacious or being fallacious or fallaciousness. I don't really understand it.
Fallacious, based on a
Here
mistaken
it's
belief.
just being used to mean illogical.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it's the same thing. Logical. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Is that when people in Speaker's Corner would say, "Oh, you've just built a straw man"? Something.
Yeah, so a straw man would be a type of fallacious argument. There's categories. So there's kind of appeals to authority, appeals to nature, appeals to fucking hell. There's loads. I can't think of them all off the top of my head. I mean, they're kind of useful in categorizing kind of frequently occurring and common forms of illogical arguments, but yeah, I mean, simply pointing them out doesn't necessarily render the proposition that someone's putting forth invalid. That's the thing. I mean, if what we're doing is just to discredit people, then I mean, it's fine to kind of say, okay, well, you appear to be displaying fallacious or faulty.
Well, then I would ask you then, could a fallacy be used? Could that accusation of fallacy be used for religious beliefs?
Yeah, I'm sure that fallacious reasoning could be incorporated into someone's kind of belief system. I don't think I wouldn't say that any belief system is kind of insulated from that possibility. I think
Okay.
I think the I mean, yeah, our brains seem to be just as capable of producing faulty reasoning as we are producing kind of sound reasoning. So I mean, computers, I think Ralph has talked about this, and type 1 and type 2 errors, stuff like that. And I guess maybe some of the faults of humans have been highlighted in the computing revolution. So some of the problems that presented themselves with the original computers, who were women in places like Bletchley Park and stuff like that, working on the Enigma machine, and people in rooms, basically. Brains were the first computers, but in kind of reproducing their function, we've been able to I guess highlight some of the flaws in the kind of circuiting or the wiring of humans. So humans are we are kind of we are delusion generating machines as much as we are kind of rational agents, I suppose. But I mean, it depends.
If this virus comes out the Chinese race, and then the economy is going to crash everywhere, isn't it?
The what?
The economies are going to crash everywhere because all the goods and all the stuff comes from China.
Wait, where did that come from? We're talking about fallacies, and you just come in with China. I thought you were going to say something about a Chinese room. Me and James S.C. got into that
You were
briefly
talking
yesterday.
about technology and computers.
Yeah.
Because you were just talking about technology and computers. All our bits of technology come from China. That's how the thought came.
Have you built your computer yet, Ali Khan?
No, I'm busy this Wednesday. I need to do it on a Wednesday because I tend to be free on a Wednesday. The next Wednesday. I'm just putting it off.
Work on your timing, Ali Khan, as well.
Yeah.
No, that was good timing.
Work on your timing. Your timing leaves a little to be desired, Ali. But yeah.
I was shopping at Alibaba then too. That's why.
But yeah, James SC, man. We were talking about something before. I had you in mind for free speech, and I think it was what EB was talking about, whether or not people kind of consider the kind of moral implications of free speech, or whether or not people are just kind of pursuing this amoral end goal where they can say whatever they want without kind of offending people, or maybe there's kind of a middle ground there that needs to be explored. Yeah, what are your thoughts on free speech and kind of legislation around it and that sort of stuff? Any thoughts?
Yeah, from what I heard about what EB was talking about, he was interested on the individuals and their mindsets and their thinking around it, and whether they thought that their use of free speech was moral. And that strikes me as kind of a separate question from the legislative question of, is it better for society to have a legal system where people can say things without being legally punished for it, and how wide a range of things they should be allowed to say without being legally punished for it? Because so some people might use their free speech in a unkind way. Like they might use their free speech to every morning when they go out along the street, they get kind of shout at someone, "Hey, ugly," and just keep on walking along their way, and they don't like follow them repeatedly saying it in a kind of harassing way, but they still kind of do it in a rude way. And so that, you normally consider that immoral. But even so, even with that kind of, I reckon that a society with the free press and free expression of ideas is generally preferable to one that kind of strictly limits those things.
I'd agree with that. Ali Khan, any thoughts on that?
What?
Ali Khan, we're not talking about China.
No, I'm just looking at Alibaba again.
Do you think that's a preferable society to live in, one that doesn't kind of have...
One other thing that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I think there needs to be a balance between free speech and everything, because next man can just be, because we can end up having, if James wants to go on the free speech down road, we can end up having Miss Amaras just cussing out everyone's mums and everything, and James S.C. would say that's fine, that's free speech, but that's quite offensive.
So the distinction would be that the distinction would be that kind of, I'd say that's fine legally, like as in I don't think any force should be exercised to prevent him from doing so. Like I think he should be free to do that without fear of legal repercussions. But obviously that would be rude behavior if Mr. Amars or anyone else decided to do that.
Yeah,
no, I think there should be legal prescription.
I was going to say that. I mean, how do we incorporate principles like I don't know, politeness or manners? What do those principles become in a society where the kind of I guess the line of what is and isn't free speech is kind of being constantly probed or even shifted, you could argue. If someone says that, I suppose offence is a threshold where people believe that they're some personal boundary of I don't know, politeness or good manners has been crossed. I guess that's what it is to be offended by someone's speech. So are we kind of giving up sort of bits and pieces of our systems of good manners and etiquette in conceding to the sort of free speech argument?
Well, possibly. I mean, it's a possibility. However, kind of, I guess the two things that need to be considered, weighed up against that possibility that we might live in a more rude society, or a society where the culture kind of sort of slides away from manners and etiquette. The alternate possibility we need to weigh against that would be, one, kind of like we were saying before, like a society where free speech is limited, kind of is more vulnerable to tyranny of some sort. And two, there's a fact that it's not really kind of a consideration, but it's more like you need to think about how what one person finds offensive, someone else might find the negation of that just as offensive. Like, for example, abortion. That there are people who believe that they'll never find the other group non-offensive. Feminists will find it extremely offensive that there are people who think that they can, so in inverted commas, legislate their bodies and say that it should be illegal for abortion to happen. At the same time, there are people who find it extremely offensive that other people might say that killing an unborn baby should be illegal. So it would be arbitrary for us to kind of privilege one group over the other and say kind of your offense matters but yours doesn't. So we should try and avoid being arbitrary where possible. So I think I submit that's one of the reasons why just like having the legal system should kind of step back and say you both have equal rights to say either of those things, and then let people sort out how they want to react to it in terms of not being friends with someone, or unsubscribing to them, or not listening to them, or walking away from them, that kind of thing.
So yeah, I would hope that most people would respond in that way, but then I think you have to. I mean, and the legal system also has systems in place for people who choose to respond to minor slights with violence, and it can be. I think someone was talking about an example where like your shoe is stepped on, like new shoes are stepped on in like a club or something, and I mean that's been the cause of people's deaths in certain instances. I would recommend that if people get their shoes stepped on, they just go to the toilet and kind of wipe it off, or don't wear new shoes out to a club. But people are probably still going to do that. People are probably still going to take offence, and certain people, when they're under the influence of alcohol or whatever else, just being kind of young and dumb, will respond with violence. And I mean, I think this maybe goes back into the topic about the Quran, because I mean, I think I can kind of agree with what you're. I guess we call it a thought experiment at this point, because it hasn't taken place, and a lot of people have used their imaginations quite actively. Yeah, I was just going to bring Safaz in. One sec, Ali Khan. Ali Khan. But yeah, I think it's been more interesting to see the response from like YouTube and these hangouts. And I mean, I've seen some pretty crazy responses, and to be fair, it's been kind of surprising. Like I believe that there are lots of irrational people out there, but I didn't maybe believe there was as many on YouTube as. So I've been surprised in that regard, but yeah, I don't know. Like I have a great deal of respect for free speech, but I'm quite pessimistic about humans. So while I could champion your cause in principle, in reality, I don't think anyone's gonna. Or I think what I should say is that the people who are programmed and kind of wired to respond badly to stuff like that are kind of going to do so regardless, and appealing to them rationally is pointless, I'd say. But yeah, I mean, taking offence, free speech. Zuriab said James should start with the Torah, work his way up to the Talmud, their Bible, their Quran. Well, to be fair, James could just bundle them all into he could just put them into like a shredder. Maybe that's a more
I
more
think
efficient
all
way.
at once would be better.
All at once,
if I did do it.
Just dump them all into a shredder at once. Does James SC know RS Sid threatened to kill him? Morning, by the way, said I hate it here. I think, well, hypothetically, I think
I have been informed.
That's what he said. I don't want
headshot, James, headshot. He said headshot, remember, yeah? Big up, Dan. He said headshot to you, not just normal one.
Yeah, I've been told.
But Dan, what would the normal British public do if he did the same thing to the Poppy? I think he'd get the same treatment from some of these people.
We've established that, Faz, but I think there are irrational people out there who will just do stuff that you wouldn't.
That is my point, Dan. Literally, there's some like mad cases, isn't there? Literally, yeah. Because I'll be honest with you, the last 2 or 3 incidents at the park involving Muslims, and let's be honest, yeah, the 2 people that it fell to, Abbott and Omar, yeah, they're the 2 most like volatile characters there is. You can't expect anything, and they didn't do nothing. That's the weird thing about it. I don't know if you noticed, yeah. If it was anybody else, I'd think, okay, yeah. But if these 2 did something, I'd say, yeah, there's something wrong with them upstairs anyway. And I think it's just somebody wants a reaction, mate. That's all it is from all this. And to be honest, James, yeah, you got a screw loose, like I said. I understand your point, what you're saying, yeah. But the fact is that your morals should actually say that if somebody holds something sacred, just don't take the piss. Talk to them properly. Yeah, okay, you can argue with them, but I just don't see the point in doing all this. Yeah, it makes any thingy. You're not going to achieve anything. That's the thing. If anything, you're going to be the first atheist, yeah. That's going to probably, I don't know what's going to happen to you, yeah, but you're not going to die for a good cause here, if that's going to happen. It's just a bit weird from you. But I mean, like I said, you've got your right to, by all means. But the problem is, James, I know for a fact, yeah, if it was outside Speaker's Corner, you would do it nowhere. Because even where I live, yeah, if you did that, the non-Muslims, if you were to do that with the Quran or anything, the non-Muslims would stop you. Forget the Muslims. That's how they are. And this is the good thing about England, the UK. You get some pockets of idiots, but like this is why I live up north. And I'll tell you something, right? If that happened here, we had the BNP and all them lot around here, and guess what? The white people were protecting the mosques. It's weird. Can you believe that? They were telling us to go and pray while they were sat outside when these bloody idiots were around marching and stuff, throwing pigs' heads and all that stuff. So for me, this is why I just think you're just one individual. There's something wrong with you. But the majority of people I know, they wouldn't even stand for this.
But the thing is, I don't actually know what I could do. Like, all right, if I question myself and said, what would how would I intervene in either? Let's imagine I turn a corner, and there's 2 possible things that I can see as I turn this corner. One is James SC in the process of shredding some holy book, right? The other possibility is that I turn a corner and I see a mob surrounding James SC after he's done this, but I'm not aware of what he's done, and I see them about to attack him. I'm probably not going to intervene in the first example because I don't know. There's too many questions. Is it his book? Is that his shredder? Is there some reason for him to do that? Does that reason require me to have some kind of immediate response? I'll probably just walk by. It wouldn't necessarily. I mean, afterwards, if it then became a topic of conversation, and I could be like, "Oh yeah, I saw that guy. Yeah, I probably don't agree with what he did, but I'm not gonna impinge on his freedom to do so." But if I turned the corner and saw someone trying to attack James, then regardless of what and I wasn't aware of that. I mean, yeah, I'd probably jump in. If I then got my head kicked in and I found out it was because James had done X, Y, and Z, then I'd probably be pissed off that I jumped in and, I don't know, maybe gotten myself into like a world of hurt that I could have avoided. But I think, yeah, people would probably only intervene in the case that someone... So this is the interesting thing, like, alright, if you're to say that this irrational person who might attack James is out there, I would wager and say that there's a lot of people out there who would defend James on the same token. Just knowing what human nature is about, if that makes sense, Faz.
Okay, Dan, I'll give you another scenario then, yeah? Okay, fair enough, bro. Big up to what you're doing. Imagine, yeah, James FC, yeah? He did what he did, yeah? And there was a doctor there, and he got beaten up, yeah? Life and death, critical, whatever. And this doctor was a Muslim or a Jew or, you know, a Christian or Hebrew, whatever. Then he realizes, yeah, hang on, this guy's done this. I'm not going to help him. Is he in his right to do that? Or morally, does he have to help him as a doctor?
Wait, let's say that again.
Morally.
Could
now,
you...
James doesn't have morals, yeah, to think about that person's, what his feelings is, then he's a hypocrite. Because if that doctor has to save him because of, you know, what he's done, yeah, he's obliged by that doctor. That doctor, to me, then, what you're saying is, well, that doctor, no, maybe he shouldn't have saved him. Why should he?
Can you explain that reasoning a bit better?
The reasoning is, yeah, if you did what you did and there was a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or whatever doctor there, yeah, and you got beaten up black and blue, and this guy was the only person that could save you, yeah, would you expect him to save you, James? After what you did?
I think it's part of the Hippocratic Oath to do that.
Why should he, though? No, but hang on, but that oath here means jack shit though, because that's just an oath. It's a man-made oath. It's not a religious oath for him. It's not his belief. He don't have to abide by that.
So you're saying that the Muslim doctor, your Muslim doctor,
hang on. See, this is the problem though, James. Why do you keep going up fucking Muslim arse? I didn't say that.
You're the one who brought this scenario. You said a Muslim doctor.
No, I said Muslim, Christian. Yeah, remember, I said all of them. Why do you always go for Muslim?
Okay, any religious doctor, then, fine.
So would you expect him to save you?
Even if you took an oath.
No, what's that oath got to do with it? That oath is nothing.
Well, it's part of the Hippocratic Oath.
So
if you're saying I solemnly swear to do this, then you'd normally expect someone to do what they solemnly swore to do.
Okay.
It's their word.
Why? What's that word? That doesn't mean nothing. He doesn't owe you anything.
You're doing quite a bad service towards religious people right now. You're kind of suggesting that any sort of word or promise they make, it's fine for them to break it, so long as it doesn't have anything to do with their religion. And I think a lot of religious people would, disagree with you on that.
Do you know what, James? Thank you very much, for saying that. Because you as an atheist don't have an oath, then, do you? You don't have a code of conduct, do you? That's why it's all right for you to do what you like. When you hold these other people, to a standard. Oh, by religious, they've taken that oath because they're going to go against their religion.
No, it doesn't have anything to do with religion.
Your code of conduct, that allows you to do this. So
it's nothing to do with religion. It's like if I say to someone, I promise I won't eat any more cookies, and then I break that promise, am I a good guy or am I a bad guy?
But by you doing
something
to offend other people, is that not? Do you not look at that as morally it's wrong? Or
I'll answer your question as soon as you answer my question.
See, you're expecting these people to hold up an oath for whatever they've taken, and they're religious and blah blah blah, So what oath or what oath or what do you have? What morals do you have to actually say, well, these guys actually respect something? I shouldn't go out my way to do this. You don't. You have your own thing.
Can you elaborate on that question? And also, while you're at it, answer my question first.
What question is this?
The question was, if I say I promise I won't. If I say to someone, I promise I won't eat any more cookies, and then I go out and I eat some cookies, is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do?
It's not going to be the end of the world if I break my promise about eating some cookies, is it? Come on.
Okay, but is it a good thing to do or a bad thing to do?
It's not really that much of a big deal, I don't think. To be honest.
No, but is it a good thing or a bad thing?
No, but if they're religious, then it's a bad thing according to you, If you're
if they're anyone.
Who?
So so my answer to the question, you still haven't answered really your answer, but my answer to the question is, if someone makes a promise and then breaks that promise, that is an immoral thing for them to do. Right. So that's my and that's whether or not they're religious. So I'm posing you the same question. If someone makes a promise,
if they make an oath,
I promise I won't eat cookies, or I promise I'll keep the Hippocratic Oath. is it good for them to break that promise?
From my point of view, from my religion, yeah, I have to keep that oath. Yes, if I give a promise to somebody, yes.
Okay, so fine. Then those people should also keep their oath, according to you.
According to me, yes. But I'm
and according to me as well.
But then, as an atheist, yeah, what oath do you have? You have to abide by the law of the land, don't you?
The oath is any oath that you make. Any oath that anyone makes, they should keep.
That's it. It means nothing else. I've got one thing better than that. The religious people have got one step. They go one step further or two steps further. They have a religious morality inside them. Religion in the head. It's not just about an oath that they take it to the country.
But
anyway, I could actually come to speak to Dan about something else, man.
We can leave it after this. But it's funny how a few minutes ago. No, Safaz, like we can finish this conversation right now. There's a little bit of reverberation. I don't know whose that is.
No, that's me, bro. Yeah, my line's a bit thingy in it. I'm just on the thingy. But James, I'll definitely catch up with you on this topic anyway. I just wanted to give a little quick support to Dan, even though he doesn't.
Okay, can you say that thing to Dan just after in 10 seconds? Because I think the interesting thing about this conversation is that by the end you agreed that yes, it is bad to break your oath, but earlier on when you asked me about
that's because
a doctor. And you said, and I pointed out, the doctors make a Hippocratic oath. You said, so what's that nothing to do with their religion?
So hang on,
kind
when
of
you make
mixed messages.
Hang on 1 minute. So when you say what did you say?
Hippocratic oath. It's the oath that every doctor takes before they, qualify as a doctor.
And is that? I mean, do they have to? I mean, obviously they stick to that because of the law of the land, isn't it? Is that what it is?
It's moral. It's immoral. It's like
moral
oath.
Okay.
It's like a personal oath.
Moral oath. Okay. But if he wishes to not to go by that, then can he do that? I suppose you guys don't have morals, do you?
So wait, they're physically capable of it, just as anyone is physically capable of breaking a promise. But we'd still surely anyone would condemn someone for breaking their promise.
Okay, I'll speak to you about this later on. I've got to get on it anyway. But Dan, thank you very much for having me, Dan. Big up, Dan. Great show as usual.
Safaz, don't you want to talk about witness about Saved by the Girls?
Witness. Yeah, that was why I actually came. Your witness, Preston, witness. Remember that guy? How are you doing, bro? You're right, G. I was just gonna say, man. Yeah, tell that what's his name? Yeah, that kryptonite. Stop running away from me. He said he was gonna come on my channel yesterday, and he ran away. So, just wanted to know, and when he does come, bro, I need you to come in it.
Ali was telling me that Kryptonite and Saved by Grace are one and the same.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Do you remember my first encounter with you and so-called Saved by Grace?
Yeah. This was on the private Hangouts. I remember.
I read it. Yeah. So and then when I told him about that, then he realized who I am. He never came back. So that's why I said, listen, I got my witness. He was there. Regardless. Sorry, Dad, I'm going to do it anyway. But I'm just saying, please, if he comes, I need you to jump on in it because I don't want him to think I'm lying. You were there as my witness, and he ran away. And he never came back for me. Yeah. So have you chosen religion yet again, or are you still?
No, I'm still searching. Still searching.
That's good, man. I know you're searching. That's good. Anyway, Dan, cheers, bro. Thank you very much for letting me on. Big up, like, and subscribe to that stuff. And Dan, man, I don't know how I got shitloads of subs yesterday, man. Cheers if you subscribed.
Nice. Welcome to Old Hickory. Welcome to Rob as well. Morning or afternoon. I keep saying morning. Welcome. What were we discussing prior to Faz's arrival?
It was a freedom of speech and the morality embedded within freedom of speech.
Yes.
Freedom of expression.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. All right. Cool. So, I think I gave the. Oh yeah, we were talking about. Yeah. All right. So I would say just kind of imagining the scenario that I would probably not intervene in the case that I saw what James was doing, although I strongly disagree with it. I would therefore not be inclined to react violently. But if I turned the corner and happened upon a mob who were trying to do something to James SC, I'd probably intervene. In a third scenario that I could imagine, if I was aware of a scenario, let's say in advance, so let's say I go to Speaker's Corner and I see a mob assembling and then like descending on James SC, would I get involved at that point, knowing the full picture? Probably not. If I probably wouldn't go to Speaker's Corner if I knew that. But then there are people who would, and I think that's maybe where we were before Faz got involved. There are people who would get involved and who would defend James's right to do that, just as there are people who would defend the kind of honour of any groups that might be offended by his actions. So yeah, maybe Rob, maybe we can kind of like, do you think there should be more of the kind of people who would intervene to defend James's right to do that? Do you think there should be more of those types of people in society?
I think if we value, thank you, and good afternoon to the panel. I think if we value freedom of expression and freedom of speech to whatever level you value it at, hopefully the more the better, then yes. And I've been consistent. I actually said it to Faz, and I didn't get it. But I said I would, if it was he was doing that by the EDL, I would stay aside and say, hey, we disagree on doctrine and ideologies and so forth. But if I'm going to be consistent and I'm going to advocate for freedom of expression and freedom of speech, then I will defend Faz's right in front of the EDL or somebody else to burn or to tear up a poppy, in the same way that I would defend James's right. So I think we do need those sort of people to defend that. I wouldn't personally do that. That's my personal opinion, but I can't put that onto James and say, hey, James, you should do what I say, unless there were good reasons to do so. So while I personally wouldn't do it, I can sympathize with the reason that James is doing so, and I would protect his justice. And by the way, I said this to Faz. It was an interesting day. I was on Faz's channel, and I defended him 4 times. At the end of the day, this person came on, and I let rip. She was saying Muslims are imported and all this sort of stuff, and I sort of really gave her a hard time on it. But I said at that stage, right, there was a Muslim on Facebook about a few years ago that said something on Facebook about he's glad that the British soldiers are dead and burn the poppies and all that sort of stuff. And he was arrested. And for me, that was outrageous. So I think if we're going to accept it, we have to accept it for all sides. And so in answer to your question, yes, I should be a lot more people defend freedom. But they could be consistent and do it on all sides, not just the side that suits them or that they're happy with.
Cool. Seems reasonable. Old Hickory, any thoughts on the topic? Do you think there should be more people who are prepared to defend the free speech of people that they disagree with? Maybe he's not there. Witness?
That's a tough question. I mean, I wouldn't stand by the side of white supremacists and defend their right to say what they're saying. They can say what they want to say. I'm not going to stand by and help them say it. They're on their own. So it's subjective. Who's like, am I going to support an organization who wants to have the freedom to express making love to kids, which is not a far-fetched idea because there was such an organization in the 70s.
PI, the Paedophile Information Exchange.
Yeah. So I'm not one of these people who you can say what you want, but I'm not going to stand by you and support you or say you have freedom to say that, because we know full well. That's actually a good question in this day and age. Are people allowed to go to Speaker's Corner and start talking about their love for making love to children, and how would they be allowed to do that? I think the law would stop them, and I would say quite rightly so. So I guess with freedom of speech, I'm not an absolutist, if that's a word. I believe certain things should not be heard publicly, and we can find out these people who are being sneaky. There are ways, that the police can use to find them out and lock them up. I don't want to come to Speaker's Corner or walk in the street and see someone talking and promoting pedophilia, promoting rape, or promoting bestiality, or promoting executing an MP because they don't like that MP's views, which is not a far-fetched idea, because a couple of years ago an MP was murdered by someone who did not like that MP's political views. So that person had freedom of speech to express himself through social media and stuff. So I'm not one for being a free speech absolutist. I wouldn't stand by their side, and I wouldn't help them. I wouldn't support them. I wouldn't do it, Dan.
Speaking of MPs, did you guys see that Based Amy was unfortunately for I think it was considered stalking and harassment of an MP because on a couple of occasions she shouted, "You're a disgrace."
The sentence was 28 days.
We've got,
Somebody last night was telling me she's actually been released. She was released.
Okay, that's good. I don't think she should have been thrown in jail to begin with. I think it was very unfortunate.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, but I think she needs psychological help, right? I don't think she's playing with a full deck.
I think she's very good at getting herself into these situations, and then kind of monetizing her plight. I think is the best way of describing what she does. It's kind of this.
Well, that definitely isn't her motivation, though. It's just something that happened afterwards. Like she was doing this before any kind of money came in. She stands by her principles.
I forgot to mention, because earlier when I was speaking to Dan, we were talking about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I was reading out the Human Rights Act of 1998, Article 10, point 2 on freedom of expression, which says that that these freedoms would be restricted, penalties would be prescribed, formalities and conditions would be implemented on your freedom of expression if it was felt that it was against national security, territorial integrity, public safety, and they would implement these restrictions for the protection of health or morals, for the protection of the reputation or rights of others. So legally, it clearly says there is no absolutism.
Is that in the EU Freedom of Speech Declaration?
That's no. Well, it started off there, but then it gets passed down into UK law and then changes its name and becomes the Human Rights Act of 1998. But when it's created by the EU, it has a different name.
Okay.
But then when it gets disseminated to all the member states, it then its name changes. So when it came to the UK, it then became the Human Rights Act of 98. But the original would have some European charter, it'd be like the European Charter or something. I can't remember what number. Okay. Yeah. So
okay.
That's the one. So legally, absolutist doesn't exist, not yet anyway.
No, I agree that there is no. Well, I guess the US is the closest, but I agree that it's not absolutist in some sense. But even things like shouting fire in a crowded theater, right? People normally pointed that wasn't a judgment, right? Something like that. That in fact happened with a case where people were standing trial for. I think it was sort of like treason or sedition, where they were communist supporters, and somebody asked Judge Wendell Holmes what would not constitute freedom of speech, and he famously said, or infamously said rather, shouting fire in a crowded theater. Now that judgment, not his, partly what he said there, but the judgment against these people, they were supposedly communist or whatever, that was overturned in any case. So it's such a difficult thing to decide what is it that constitute this, and what is the, and that's what I always ask people, what's the methodology by which people can do this consistently? And it seems like that there isn't a consistent methodology. So it's these vague language, and then people go, okay, well, let's look at the specifics. Okay, cool, look at a specific case. How do you then adjudicate on that such that that would be a case law that you could do for the future? And that just seems to be, not available, or it seems incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for people to do. Otherwise they would do it. So I don't think, for example, shouting fire in a crowded theater would constitute, and as I say, the Supreme Court overturned that, I think, in the late 70s, that decision, as well as that thing. And Christopher Hitchens famously said it once in a crowded theater, and of course nothing happened. Now you could argue, hey, he was standing at the front, but again, it presupposes that people will all suddenly jump up. There'll be all kinds of mass hysteria. There's a lot of presuppositions with regards, and with anything else, right? There's presuppositions that if you say something bad will happen. But if James went down to Speaker's Corner and he tore the pages out of all of these books and people wandered past like he didn't exist, would anybody then still say that there was there a problem, other than their personal opinion, that they didn't like it?
Wouldn't it then give people more of an incentive to be immoral, because they would think, well, James got away with doing that. What else can I do it? How far take this, since there's no repercussions? So I might just take it even further.
Yeah, sure. People will attempt to do that, and that's what Tan did, right? But is there anything that Tan did that should be outlawed? Did he do something that we think that's currently in law? Because you could probably find something, but do we think that in Speaker's Corner, and use that as the example rather than on the street corner or down in the hood or up the road or wherever the case is, where you have people that will disregard the law of the land and beat somebody up? But in Speaker's Corner, was there something that we presumably some of you guys would say there was things there that was a boundary that should in fact be legislated against? Well, I disagree with a lot of stuff he said. Sorry, carry on.
He had a movement of people behind him, and earlier Dan was talking about civility and manners and stuff. So the point is, if you let someone like that get away with that, it steamrolls, it gets bigger, it snowballs. And so more and more people start turning up. And then other groups of people then turn up. And then before you know it, you have a free-for-all fighting. There's no more mannerisms, good mannerism. There's no more logic or rationale. It's a case of, well, if he's going to be allowed away with it and he's going to have all these supporters coming down to join him, then I'm going to bring my supporters who are against that, and we're just going to fight it out. So then it leads to violence, chaos. That's what I can see happening.
Yeah, I agree that's possible, no doubt about it. But the issue with that is that anything like that can be the case. So if a Muslim went on with his friends, which we did see there, right, and then on the other side, who's either anti-Muslim and or anti-Islam, at least anti-Islam, if not anti-Muslim, then that happened anyway. So then you would argue, but hang on a moment, the Muslims shouldn't be bringing the Quran down there because it's likely to incite the EDL to come down there, and then there'll be a big punch-up. So I guess the question is, well, where does it stop? What is it where do we draw the line and say, okay, here it's clearly demarcated that you can do this, and there's little or no chance that you can incite some violence?
I guess you could then argue it becomes subjective, because I think with the royal parks, if you look at their policies, I think they're quite strict officially on religion, but they don't enforce it. So theoretically speaking, they shouldn't be religious people.
You might know it better than me. Yeah, you might know it better than me. Is it only a restriction against prayer, or is it a restriction against speaking? And is that elsewhere? And does Speaker's Corner have a special dispensation against for that?
I'd have to check, but I think it was against praying.
Yeah,
it's against collective religious acts. So they banned, for example, some people wanted to do a play performance of Jonah and the Whale, and they didn't give permission for that because it would be considered a collective act of worship or collective religious act.
Was that in Speaker's Corner or somewhere else?
The Hyde Park, the royal parks in general.
Okay, because I'm wondering whether Speaker's Corner has some special dispensations that is separate to Hyde Park itself, or does it all to your knowledge?
I don't believe so. Not in terms of the policies that they print on their sort of website. I'm going to bid you all good afternoon. It's been a nice chatting to everyone. Good to see you again, Rob and the other speakers, and Dan
down
and
to the park.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Going to the park, James?
Probably not. No, not today.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Right. Cheers, mate.
Goodbye. Yeah, but that's a good question, Rob asked. I don't know how you'd be able to answer that, Dan. That's right, but I think it's subjective. How is that we decide when and where they will start enforcing freedom of expression limitations, it seems.
The other thing I watch, and it's kind of along the same lines, similar, I suppose you could say, and I watch quite a few of these. I don't know if you've heard of this term auditing, where people go around with a camera just filming from public places, which they're entitled to do both here and especially in the US. Obviously, they have the constitutional amendment there. But we have it here as well. We have a memo that was sent down by the Commissioner of Police Chiefs or whatever it is. It's like this organization suggesting that photography is not a crime. And people go around doing this. And it's surprising how badly trained the police are, where they're trying to get name and address. Sometimes people have been arrested. I don't know if you've seen any of that and what your thought is, but it's pretty shocking, right? Regardless of who the person is, they will sometimes be arrested. In this country, the police in the US are even more heavy-handed. Holy crap, those guys sometimes they are scary. But it even happens here as well, where people are being arrested. So I don't know, because that also goes towards, you know, your freedom to perform an act, which is to video from a public place to anywhere else.
True. I think that's subjective as well. There's a guy whose YouTube channel I used to watch. What's his name? And he was doing the same thing you're talking about, the photography and filming. Yeah. And he kept testing the law. Sometimes I think he was almost winding the authorities, because he would try and film something in a mobile phone store. And when they would try and stop him, he would try and, you know, cite some kind of law, saying he wasn't breaking the law, and then the police would come, and then he would challenge the police, and he would film what the police were saying to him, because he was saying, why can't I film here? Why can't I take a picture here? What law am I breaking? I'm not breaking this law or that law. And it was interesting, some of the responses he got back from the authorities, or the people within the stores, trying to say it's private property, so private property, there's certain things that they can do which they couldn't do if he was outside of the store. So it's almost as if it would say legally he couldn't film in their property, and they're allowed to stop him. But once he stepped outside, he could keep on filming, because it was then public, which was a different set of laws. It was interesting watching his channel.
Yeah. And I'm in agreement with that. If you're on a private property, the property owner can trespass you. So, hey, I don't want you on here for whatever reason. If the right of access is reserved, essentially, you don't put that on the door. But yeah, you're right. So the challenge comes in with something like shopping malls, where the public has, you know, essentially right of access. That's a bit more of a grey area. But like a shop, yeah, he could be trespassed, because all you have to say to somebody is, hey, we don't allow filming here. I want you to leave the property. And if the person doesn't then leave, you can call the police. The police then still have to come and warn him as well. They can't just arrest him on the spot, from what I understand. They have to say, you need to leave now. And if you don't, within a short, reasonable time, then they can arrest you for trespassing. Yeah.
So that would work with Speaker's Corner then, because all of Hyde Park is private property. Technically speaking, it belongs to the Queen or her aristocratic family. So what they have there is like guidelines based on private property.
Yeah, I suppose the difference there is that it is open to the public, and is considered a public access, and as such, there's very little difference between that, if anything, as you say, apart from it being owned by the Royal Parks, to the pavement outside. And there's a long tradition going back as well. So I suppose you could try to do something like that, but you know, the expectation is that it is an open air place that the public has access to, and therefore it would be considered public property in that aspect. But you're right, it's owned by, well, I suppose all property is owned, isn't it? Whether it's the public parks or whether it's state owned, it's its own property. But if it's state owned, and if the public parks falls under the state, I don't know if it does, you might know better, then that would be part of what the public essentially has access to or owns, if you want to say it that, as a collective.
Yeah, I'd have to check that, but the aristocracy always seems to have privileges above the state for some dubious reason, but I'd have to double check.
Yeah, I think I don't know what the term is, but I would do away with the monarchy in that sense. They could be there just as people, but to have any say, and apparently still going to them to ask for royal assent and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we left that sort of monarchical type idea a century ago, but Britain is curious in that way. People love the monarchy. Well, that's fine. You can go visit them and all that, but to be paid out of taxes and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So you would then still support James in his quest to do what he wants?
I'd support his right to do it. I wouldn't necessarily agree. And when you talked about it earlier, I think there's that distinction, right? So with the white supremacists, I wouldn't agree with what they do, but I support their right, just as if it was supremacists saying it. I don't agree with that, and I wouldn't support their right either, or whatever other distasteful thing. So it's not like I go, hey, I'm supporting them. What I am supporting is the freedom of expression, not necessarily what the person is saying. So I wouldn't do what James is doing, but I support his right, like I would with Faz, for example, or one of them. So I think there's that distinction. It's not to be confused that, hey, you're supporting the person or what they're doing, but you're supporting their right to do it. I think that's the distinction for me.
And in South Africa, that song, Ulundu, or was it Kill the Boer, Shoot the Boer? Would you support their freedom to sing it?
Yes, they've got, well, assuming they have the freedom to do it. I don't know what the law is now, whether it's changed, but they have the right to say it. Obviously, we can disagree, just as I would if they were saying, hey, kill the kafir or whatever it is, which is the term they used to use. Disagree with that as well. But if the law says you're allowed to say it, then you're allowed to say it. So I think the difficulty is, or even if the principle says it, then a difficulty is how do you argue against that? And I think the only thing that people do often is argue by like intuition. Hey, everybody knows, which is like, appeal to popularity, or hey, we all know it's wrong. And I think that's difficult to argue for as a strong reason to ban something.
What would you use to argue against something? Because I know you wouldn't use religion.
No, so ultimately I'd use the well-being of conscious creatures. So my standard as a non-believer is the well-being of conscious creatures. But that then gets into a whole discussion. What does that mean? How do you do that? And it's not clear-cut in every instance. But then neither is it under religion either. So we as human beings don't have it perfectly worked out in every way. But that would be my standard. But people often confuse my standard, right? I have what I would consider an objective standard. Once you accept that it's objective, the challenge is why should you accept that, right? That's the question, right? And that's the age-old question. Supposedly you can't get an ought from an is, but if you accept the well-being of conscious creatures is the standard that we use for morality, then I have a standard by which we can judge things in principle, if not in practice, and from there we can go forward. So that would be my standard. Whereas a religious person would probably say, hey, my standard is God. But that's got its own problems, I think, as well. So none of them are perfect. I like it's knocked down like you can get a perfect answer under every circumstance. But I think there is a difference here. So when, like Sir Faz was saying to James, hey, you don't have a standard, presumably James is similar to me. He's got the standard of well-being, and that's what he would use to judge something, or to say, hey, why I should keep my word because I'm somebody of integrity. I want a society with people that have integrity, and I feel that's a better society than everybody promising to do something and then reneging on that. So you could easily make the argument from my point of view why I wouldn't break my oath, not just because a book says so, but going further than that even, I would ask Sir Faz, and he wasn't on long enough, which person do you think is the better moral person? The person who does something and follows through because they have a moral oath, or the person who does something and follows through only because their book tells them so, and if they don't, they might burn in hell, or they have some other, which of those two is the more moral person? And I think the question is pretty self-evident.
When you're next free, it'd be interesting to hear you elaborate on the well-being of conscious creatures.
It's pretty much it's pretty much the Sam Harris view with a one or two tweaks in there. So if you've read, or if you haven't, The Moral Landscape, it's similar. I just don't use the word objective. I've been convinced by TDS Dave and others that using the word objective just gets you into a minefield. So what I'd rather say is, here's a moral system. Let's compare and contrast it with some other system. I'd rather use that term than say subjective, objective, relative, because most people are confused about those terms anyway. And then it doesn't allow us to actually evaluate the different systems. But that's a book, that's, if you're a non-believer, that's, could be worth reading. It's not the be all and end all.
Check him out, Sam Harris.
Yeah, I mean, I've read most of his stuff. I don't agree with everything he says. For example, he is of the view that torture should be illegal, but there should be some times when it should be used. And I'm not in agreement with that. So there's some things. He also has the sort of profiling view that I'm still considering. So he's got some things that I don't agree with. So, but I think that's the other thing, right? If you follow somebody, it doesn't mean, or you agree with some of their views. I think sometimes we conflate things. Hey, you follow whoever, that means you agree with everything. I think that's a mistake as well, right? You would agree with some views that somebody holds. That doesn't mean you follow them, i.e. that you're just going to accept whatever they say without question. And somebody like Amy, for example, just thinking of that, she's a follower of Tommy Robinson. No matter what Tommy does, she will find some way to rationalize it, right? And she's not alone. I've seen other people do that. And that's where people become irrational.
That's interesting.
Big up to Rajiv on the panel. Welcome, man.
Yo, let me also say hello since I got my audio.
Big up to Old Hickory as well. Yeah, I asked you a direct question and I got no response before, Old Hick. You must have been making yourself a refreshment, a beverage, but it's all good, man. Welcome to the panel. I saw you just wrote something in the chat. The they burn flags in the UK, or is this a crime? I don't know if burning. I guess burning a flag in speak. I mean, I don't actually think people are allowed to carry flags in Speaker's Corner. I think that's the thing. So I could be wrong, but I think it is an offence to burn the poppy.
No,
I think
I've seen. This is what I think. It's something about the flagpole. That's what that red cap boy Max. He got kicked out of the park. They made him take his flag down, but then he just wear it like a cape. But I asked that question because that's a big deal in the U.S. There's always a little flag burning thing where somebody will burn a flag and then maybe it'll tick off a military vet and then you'll have a fight or something along those lines. So I was just curious if you had a similar type of situation in the UK.
Can I quickly just point out? I think just because I was, we can all easily Google this stuff. I think it's an offense to burn a flag. So even this whole talk about like freedom of speech, I'm just wondering, like, where is everyone? Is everyone still making up their own concepts of freedom of speech, or are we actually following the law?
Discussing that before we went live with a guy called EB or Nick. He was talking about whether or not people are kind of pursuing, I guess you could say, an amoral or immoral end goal with their free speech, whereby they just really want to kind of be able to say anything that they want with a freedom that insulates them from consequences, which I guess would be social ones, legal consequences, any consequences that you could imagine, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, I guess this concept is still being worked out by the people who kind of campaign for it.
The only thing is, like, there's so many legal avenues to go through that. I mean, we have legal precedents that set, the difference in standards of law and etc. I mean, what I'm reading is before 2006, the burning of the flag didn't seem to be that much of an issue. Allow greater police control over extremist protesters. 17 MPs signed a House of Commons motion calling for the burning of flags to be made a criminal offence. So very clearly, like, there's certain instances in which the offence of certain actions, are that laws do come into place in order to restrict our freedoms of speech. And this has never been like inconsistent. So when I'm hearing all of this conversation, I'm just wondering, like, where are people getting their idea of freedom of speech from? Because if it's a
Human Rights
one,
Act of 1998,
then you will understand that those people went through legal avenues in order to get their speech and their freedoms to do certain speeches actually protected under the law. What certain people in Speaker's Corner are doing is just antisocial behavior. It's not anything that's actually activism, is it? I mean, in the loop as much, but is this whole thing to do with something about James and the Quran and throwing it on the floor and whatever, blah 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 blah? Is that what it is?
Loosely, we kind of came off on a tangent with that, but yeah, I think you could bundle a few things. So maybe, that I guess just anything that you could say is pushing the kind of limits of or testing the boundaries of free speech and I guess offensive language or behavior. I don't know.
But then I think at the same time, we need to acknowledge the difference in powers, especially when it comes to minorities versus majorities. In this situation, particularly, I think Rob was saying how in Speaker's Corner, you're not really allowed to carry flags. I think only 2 summers ago, we had a whole bunch of people turning up to Speaker's Corner with a bunch of flags, and the police didn't do anything in particular. But we then had the people who wanted to do, prayer in the park. And, it's not just them that's been doing, group prayer within the park. And then all of a sudden that gets banned. So I think there's a significant difference in the treatment, and I've always said this, like I said this to the police as well, there's a significant difference in treatment when it comes to the idea and the freedom of speech. And an example in this situation would be James in particular, and I would this may be the first time I've maybe accused James of like knowing his own racial privilege and not necessarily actually using it for any good. In this particular instance, James knows that his throwing of the Quran on the floor, etc., will not necessarily provoke enough of a reaction for it to get, I guess, green, red flagged or watched by the police or anything like that. And I think Tan demonstrated this when he came to the park and was saying all manner of things. And the Muslims were able to keep themselves in a conduct that, signal to the police that, okay, they are able to take this level of X, Y, and Z. But, this doesn't really fly when it comes to like patriots and everything coming to the park. These people in particular always result to violent ends whenever they visit the park. And I think James, him in comparison to burning the poppy in the park, would receive less backlash than a Muslim coming to the park and burning the poppy. If Suleiman was to come to the park and burn a poppy, it would be game over.
What are you basing that on?
I'm basing that on the clear facts and the evidence that I can present to you. So
but
we
had
had
in the past that you point to and say that the government would go overboard to attack Solomon about that, or is that just?
Would you like me to explain?
Sure.
Cool. So we had articles in the park basically about the park, and this is in the New York Times. So this is no small newspaper. It's probably arguably one of the most read newspapers in the world, basically calling that jihad taken speaker's corner and basically labeling Soleimani and everyone else as a jihadi, etc. Despite them not actually committing any crimes of war, none of them actually going out to commit jihad, most of them saying it out of word of mouth, none of them actually doing anything action-wise. So we've seen them come with flags to the park, the flags of with the black writings, etc. And that has already given them the world stage, or been put to them as on the world stage as people who are jihadists, people who are anti-West, people who are all of this kind of stuff. And this has led to a whole ton of people coming to the park in order to physically confront individuals. So when it comes to doing certain things that are portrayed as, I guess, anti-West, which is a good thing, because I don't see West sentiment is completely productive. But when it comes to the other way around, there is a lack of backlash.
So okay, that's fair. What would you like to see done, or in that realm? Do you think that like James should be allowed to do what he wants to do, or there should be, what type of rule would you like to see the UK push in the park?
Well, it's interesting because obviously that opens up the guise of the conversation of freedom of speech and what people accept. I mean, for me personally, I make it clear that I know freedom of speech doesn't exist. I have certain sensibilities and there's certain things that I wouldn't want to see in the park. An example would be someone who believes in the concept of child love, right? That's a conversation that's recently been coming up. Would everyone here disagree or agree that someone coming to the park, right, with an image, cartoon image, so no child abuse is done, but a cartoon image of child abuse should be protected under freedom of speech?
We already covered this a while ago. I used that as an example, that same thing that you just mentioned.
Absolutely, because I brought this up like years ago and no one could answer it, because the truth is all of our freedom of speech, or our perceptions of freedom of speech, all stop with our own sensibilities. They really do. You can never really find anyone who's truly free speech. So my question is to people who do believe or say or claim to be that they freedom of speech in its entirety or whatever. A simple question would be, so what are you doing in a legal sense? What are you doing in a democratic sense to try and get what your version of freedom of speech is in, in mainstream law and politics? Because, we live in a democracy, so it's not something that you can't do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a separate question, though, Rajiv, from what the principle is. So we're talking about it. Presumably, we could elect people who claim that they want to repeal the law. I'd be in favor of repealing hate speech laws, for example, that sort of thing. I'd have to look at what else the party says. But that's an entirely separate question from the actual principle of freedom of speech or whatever limits should be put on that. So one thing is, what are you doing about it enacted? And the other is, what should...
Right. So like I said, we have a conversation beforehand. It just seems to me conversations have been for at least near half a day now. There hasn't actually been any physical efforts to try and get these things kind of put into practice. practice. So in the ethos of, like, I guess, critically talking about it and how you would go about it, what you would like different, and so, right? I mean, that's all fair good and everyone's like down for conversation, but it just seems that there are so many other times where the speech has been, I guess, what's the word, infringed upon in comparison to like the trivial things that speakers corner. And I wonder why people are paying more attention to the trivial stuff as opposed to, say, the more important stuff.
What do you mean more important? As in, like what?
I'll give you an example. Again, newspapers being owned by at least 3 sets of family or something of the sort. Again, doing my research and finding out that Daily Mail in particular hasn't really sorted part in terms of like Nazi representation within the UK, all of these kind of things, right, that actually suggest to you, and then to give you some context, the creator of the Daily Mail didn't stop at the Daily Mail. He then went on to strategically